Before we kind of begin today's presentation and introduce who we are, just a quick word about who Aon is. Aon's a leading global professional services firm that provides a broad range of risk, retirement, and health solutions. And Shannon and I are joined by 50,000 colleagues in 120 countries whose mission really is to empower results for clients by using proprietary data, analytics, to deliver insights that reduce volatility and ultimately improve performance. So as part of Aon's commercial risk solutions team, Shannon and I help clients develop a wide range of solutions that span various sectors and industries to help reduce their total cost of risk. So here in Wisconsin, our clients enjoy access to global data analytics, resources, and expertise, but with a very local and customized approach. So now that you know a little bit about Aon, just a very brief background on who we are. Shannon?
So my background extends, my career started probably in 2008, so I've got a little over 10 years experience. And my experience base, I've worked in both general industry and construction as a safety professional. I've worked in the government sector as well as working for municipalities and counties doing their safety stuff. My experience is OSHA regulation, DOT, DNR. I have some human resources background, ATF. If anybody wants to blow stuff up, we can help you with that. So it's a very broad base. I've been exposed to a lot of stuff over my career. And I'm just getting into the behavior-based approach, which we'll talk about today. So that's kind of my background. It's pretty broad. I like to know a lot about everything so I can help assist clients better across the board. Right now, not solely, but a lot of my focus goes to construction. However, that's starting to branch out a lot more and go into general industry and help them define their risk and loss control plan and how they can minimize those risks and losses to move forward with their organization.
Excellent, thank you. And again, my name's Eric Caldwell. I joined Aon in 2016 and have a broad background, mostly in general industry, beginning with the U.S. Army, moving on to commercial aviation, and then ultimately manufacturing, distribution, and fleet. And for a brief stint, served as a workers' compensation investigative claims manager with the lovely task of managing very questionable claims for compensability and possible litigation. So before we get into why employees take risks and what we can do to change behavior, recognizing that employees who engage in unsafe behaviors are usually symptomatic of a poorly designed safety process, we thought we'd begin by kind of reviewing the foundational elements of an effective process. Because first, we kind of want to make sure that our house is in order and that we have everything in place before we reach out to employees. So Shannon's going to start us off by reviewing the characteristics of a positive safety culture, followed by the components of an effective safety management system, along with real-world examples and best practices. And then we'll just briefly discuss a Dodge data and analytics study funded by the Center for Construction Research and Training and Procore, a U.S. construction project management software company that asked contractors what they thought were essential aspects of a world-class safety program. From there, we want to be sure that our leaders have the skills necessary to train and mentor multiple generations of employees on today's job sites, and then know how to build teams that want to work safely. We'll then discuss briefly some best practices on how to recruit and hire the best employees in a competitive market who tend to avoid risk. And then once we have those foundations in place, I'll focus on how to understand and coach current employees who may be prone to engage in at-risk behaviors and what we can do to mitigate those behaviors. So in a way, we're kind of building a house this morning from the foundation up. So with that said, Shannon, the floor is yours.
And just to strengthen what Eric said, you know, if we don't have, if you're looking to start dealing with the psychology of safety, right? So as risk managers, we always ask ourselves when an incident happened, you know, what could we have done better? What did we miss? A lot of our clients are starting to question the psychology of safety, right? So we have written programs in place, we have the training in place, but why are we still having incidences? Why is our risk still high? Why is our losses still high? And they're starting to address the psychology of safety, otherwise known as behavior-based safety. Now, this process does not work in every environment. If you do not have a strong culture to deal with that risk taker and start dealing with that psychology of safety, it's not going to work. So if you have a culture that is incomplete or not all on board, and there's components of that missing, and you try to inject the behavior-based safety and start dealing with that psychology, you're going to have two elements of your organization battling each other, and it's not going to work. And a lot of times, you know, when Eric and I are brought in to start implementing some of this behavior-based stuff, and we start with, what does your culture look like? Because dealing with the psychology of it and doing the behavior-based, it's a big undertaking. And if you miss some of those pieces and parts in there, it's not going to work. And you're probably going to end up abandoning the approach within 6 months to a year. Because it's just going to be exhausting trying to battle the culture with the behavior-based. So it has to be a culture that accepts the behavior-based process. And that is one of continuous improvement. Again, what we did yesterday is not good enough today. So, you know, clients used to, or people used to build a program and they have it in place and they keep it in place for 10 years and that's good enough. What we're finding is if you're not reviewing that program at least yearly, if you're not monitoring those systems and stuff you have in place at least yearly, you're behind already, okay? And what do we do to break that error chain? Here's a good example. Somebody comes to me and says, I have this great safety culture. Look at all these near misses that they're reporting. And this is all true story. So I sit down with them and they say, look at this pile of near misses. And there was like 60 of them. And I'm thinking to myself, that I understand that you're proud that you have a culture that employees can report unsafe incidences and stuff like that, but what are you doing with this stack? Okay, so it's the same way that if we get a report that's full of all this data, what are we doing with that to break that error chain? Okay, what are we doing to apply that data and what we learn to the process? We can collect numbers all day, but if our culture says we just want to look at numbers and hopefully we do better next year, instead of actually taking those numbers and throw it into the continuous improvement model, we have a problem, okay? And when you start to look at your culture, and I've dealt with this in my own career, you know, it used to say it starts at the top. If I don't have the president's buy-in, if I don't have, you know, executive team or the C-suite they call it, or the executive team's buy-in, it's pretty much useless. And that is a big part of it. However, we miss the grassroots approach. I want you to start thinking about the bottom. I want you to start thinking from the foundation and the ground. Because I can tell you more times than not, if you just, let's say I'm a safety director, and as part of my culture, I have defined myself as the be-all, end-all. So what I come out with and what I create is rule and law without any input from everybody else. You can understand how that could fail, okay? Because people are going to be resistant. That's our human nature. Okay, when we start talking about the human behavior, there's going to be resistance. That's just the way that we are built as the human species. So grassroots approach. This is taking that level that probably has more knowledge in place on the tasks and the job at hand than you do, okay? When you start opening that door and empowering your employees, your culture is going to grow stronger and it's going to be able to be maintained over a long period of time. If you cut out certain steps and certain people, it's going to create a division. It's going to create silos, right? And we're always talking about knocking down those silos. And I've worked with organizations that, you know, the safety director puts out a program. He doesn't include everybody in on it. He just launches that program. And so each silo starts building their own program because they don't agree with certain parts of the original program. So you've created a division in silos already, okay? So this piece is absolutely critical when we start talking about human behavior, okay? If you have a strong culture, then you can really start to tackle the psychology of safety. And ultimately, it does come down to choice as we face it every single day, okay? Prime example, fleet. If you have a fleet, the big thing now is installing telematics, right? Because they're trying to deal with the behavior. Because at the end of the day, strong program, but it still comes down to choice. So we have to start dealing with the psychology of safety. So if you take a look at your safety management systems and some of the components in there, again, what I have to stress here, which is absolutely the most critical part, is do not create a paper tiger. What I mean by that is, if I ask somebody to send me their safety manual so I can review it, and it's over 400 pages long, I don't know who's reading that, okay? And, you know, and just an example, I actually worked with a client who sent me their manual. It was 400 pages long. They were a manufacturer, and they had parts in there about explosives. And I can't quite understand. And I understand that people just buy manuals and they edit and stuff like this, but there is an approach there that makes it more beneficial and valuable for your organization. Identifying those safety hazards. Look at your risk management protocols. When we take a look at risk, and we take a look at the risk taker, and we take a look at all those components, what I tell people very specifically is think well beyond compliance. If we're just putting together programs and management systems that rely and focus on compliance only, whether it be with OSHA, DOT, DNR, HIPAA, whatever organization or acronym you want to use there, if we're focusing solely on compliance, we have missed the boat, okay? Those organizations release requirements and regulations, and those are awesome and they're great to protect the employee, but those are the bare minimum, okay? So if we're taking a look at risk and we're going to start dealing with the psychology of safety, we have to think well beyond just compliance. And everybody should be kind of at the place by now that we're dealing with best management practices. Because compliance will get you there, but best management practices will take you to the sky. That's that next level, that's that next evolution of safety and risk management, okay? And we deal with it a lot. If we write policies or help companies write policies, they sometimes come back and say, well, that's not even a rule or regulation. Yeah, but the rule and regulation is, again, it's bare minimum. It only gets you so far. So when you take a look at your risk management, you know, what's your attitude about risk management protocols and how you design and develop those? Go well beyond compliance, and it's going to be more value to your organization. So, and how you monitor that stuff. And again, the last part here, continuous improvement. You should be rethinking and relooking at this stuff yearly. There's going to be stuff that doesn't work. There's going to be stuff that needs to be reviewed and revamped, okay? Everybody knows that your organization, no matter how many employees you have, let's say an organization, you know, a company has 100 employees, you're dealing with 100 personalities, 100 generations. You know, risk management is not a one-size-fits-all. So you have to really understand that what you create today might not be good enough tomorrow to move forward. And just on a side note, if you're starting to design these systems and you're starting to review these systems, being tough on yourself as possible is only going to help you in the long run. From a carrier side, if you're looking to renew your insurance and stuff like that, they're looking at these components and they're scrutinizing them extremely hard this time around. You know, it's not the same game as it was 5 years ago, okay, especially on the fleet side. So really take a look at your SMS system and how you can improve that and what system you have in place. Is it working, okay? PlanDoCheckAct. You know, we have all our programs and stuff in place. If there's a hazard, are we dealing with it? Again, I go back to that example I used with the near misses. Okay, that is a great program. Your employees can come to you and report a near miss. You have a stack of 60. What did you do with that information? It's the same thing with any data you get from insurance carriers or any data, whether it be lagging indicators or leading indicators. How is your program? What is your program doing with that data? Okay. If you're measuring your performance, how are you measuring your performance? Are you going strictly off lagging indicators? Okay, so that says something about your culture. If you're relying on numbers that are after the fact, that's that rear view mirror. Okay, so you're driving down the highway, you look in the rear view mirror, everything is past you. There's really nothing you can do about it anymore. They're good numbers to look at, OSHA recordables, mod rates, and stuff like that. But what are you looking at as far as leading indicators? Are you looking at those near misses and what you're doing about them? Are they handing in 10 near misses and you're correcting 10 near misses? That's truly the way that you should be measuring your performance. Again, if you're using lagging indicators, you're kind of missing the boat there. You're looking in the rearview mirror. They're good at the end of the year. You kind of look at that stuff where you monitor it every 6 months to see where you're at, but the injuries have already occurred. The unsafe behavior was already completed, and you did not break that chain. So you're kind of missing the boat there in a rearview mirror. So make sure that when you have an issue, as far as risk management, if you have a behavior, you need to correct it right away. Okay. If we don't correct it, if we don't apply this model of PlanDoCheckAct, you're going to allow the unsafe behavior to continue. And I can tell you, if you don't do something about it, you're going to create what I call morale corruption. And we've seen it. We've seen it everywhere, right? Because we have this strong program, and it takes us years to build, and it manages risk, and it has best management practices. You bring in one wrong person or forget to do one thing, and it can collapse very easily. That's how fragile this process is. So we take a look at a contractor's perspective. Eric brought this up in the beginning. This is based off of analytics study done by the Center for Construction Research and Training. So they polled everybody, they grabbed some data. This is the top 4 that people found were key aspects of a safety program, okay? Number 1, engaged employees. This goes back to your culture. And this goes back to the beginning phases of starting to deal with the psychology of safety. If I am going to be the be-all, end-all and not take anybody's opinion, and this is the way it goes, deal with it, you're going to fail. That's just the way it goes. For me, if I'm going to sit in my office and write a program for a month and a half and not take any opinions, I'm kind of taking the long way around. And Eric and I deal with it quite a bit. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have people on staff that have more knowledge in certain areas than we do. Your employees, your workers out in the field, whether it be general industry or construction, it doesn't matter. They want a voice. And that voice is very valuable to this process, okay? They want to be heard. Is everything going to be a home run? Probably not. We don't do everything that's a home run either. But part of establishing that culture is engaging your employees in the process. This will pay dividends tenfold, okay? They just want a voice. Everybody wants a voice. Are you passionate? That's number 2 on this list. You have to be passionate about what you do. If you're not passionate, people are going to sense that, okay? I had an organization that hired a safety director. It was for a construction company. I'm sorry to be using real-life examples here, but I think it puts it in perspective. So they hire a safety director for a construction company, and he never leaves the office. Okay, he's an office director. He's an office safety director. That passion or that lack of passion to get in the field and talk to people and empower them, people pick up that rather quickly. Okay, so they're not going to come to you. They're not going to have that voice with you. They're going to go around you. So there has to be some passion there. At the end of the day, it's really about protecting human life. And as risk managers and loss control specialists and safety professionals, that's what it comes down to. Your decisions and your job is the difference sometimes between someone going home safe and someone not making it home to their family. So driving your efforts with that passion is going to pay off hugely. Is safety frequent and consistent? Okay. Are we having a once a year safety meeting? And I can tell you, and a lot of programs out there, once a year might be good enough for your organization. But I've seen it more pick up where it's quarterly at least. There's toolbox talks weekly. Training, what does your training program look like? Okay. And then the last one here is a safety professional on staff. This is a big portion of it because once you get to employees that are about that number about 100, you're looking at you should probably have a safety director or a safety professional on staff. Coupling safety with human resources, not that they're not good at both, it's just that safety has become less of a footnote and more prominent in the overall success of your organization. It used to be, and everybody can kind of agree with this or take it the way you want, safety was kind of overhead, okay? When we looked at safety directors and, safety professionals and stuff like that, they were deemed as overhead. And that has dramatically changed over the last 10 years. Now, crews and employees, they want a one-point contact for everything safety. And I can tell you from our side of things, the safety professional and managing your safety and building your culture and looking for that risk taker and evaluating risk, that's a full-time job. And when I mean full-time, it is 24/7. So coupling that with your HR or your sales manager, it doesn't work. You have to break it out, and it sends that message that you're absolutely positively serious about safety. Okay. Again, we're presenting that picture that this means something to us. If it means something to you, it's going to mean something to your workers, and it's going to minimize those risk takers. Okay. If the employees have a system they believe in and a leader they believe in, they're not going to take that risk. I promise you that. Okay. Because they just don't want to let you down. That's human nature. So what do your policies and practices look like? This is still part of that same survey. So what was valuable when developing your policies and practices? This is very interesting because especially on the construction side of things, if you don't design something that's site specific, if you design a manual that's just supposed to be a one-size-fit-all, it doesn't work on the construction side. It might work a little bit on the general industry side, but construction, if you take a look at the construction side, your sites and everything involved with those sites is changing every 30 minutes, if not sooner. Okay, so a one-size-fit-all doesn't work for every site. It just doesn't. And I've been on some very unique sites that had to have very unique plans. And we go back to, the COVID-19 stuff. Everything is very different for contractors because every site is different. It's kind of very unique every day. Are we encouraging employees to report hazards? And remember, you need to do something with that information. If you do nothing with that information you're getting from your employees, you're helping create that risk taker. Okay? This is all kind of a mind game. And I can't stress that enough that, if you want to start dealing with the psychology of safety, this all has to be in place. Okay, and I honestly, I've dealt with it firsthand in my own experiences. If you do nothing, and these employees, I don't care if it's construction or general industry, they wanted an answer yesterday. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a complete answer. It doesn't have to be a complete solution, but it has to be something. Because if they're going to take the time and report the hazard and take themselves out of that risk taker realm, we have to respond. We have to respond, absolutely. Ask for employees' input. We already talked about that extensively. And involve the employees in planning, all right? There's a certain level here, though I cut this off. Okay, you don't want to have a meeting of 100 employees trying to dictate policy, because that's going to be a nightmare. It's kind of like hitting reply all in your email. You're going to get 45 different opinions, okay? So we kind of do have to limit that group, but make sure that there's a representative for each part of your organization. There should be HR in there. There should be the field guy. There should be, you should be taking a look at these policies more as a group. Do you want to eliminate that risk taker? That's how you do it. You involve everybody, because then everybody has stake in the game. Training. This is part of that same that data analytics survey. This is very interesting, because some of these answers we take a look at: reliance on foremen and supervisors. So what that's saying as the number one is you're relying on your foremen and supervisors to perform the training, okay? And to train those foremen and supervisors, we're relying on an OSHA 30 hour. So if you're relying solely on an OSHA 30 hour, first of all, it's okay that we have foremen and supervisors do the training, okay? But we have to understand that not every foreman and every supervisor is a teacher. And I've dealt with this firsthand. The protocol was we take the highest seniority person and we make them a trainer. It doesn't work, because usually the highest seniority person, a lot of the times, doesn't want to be that teacher. And that's going to reflect on how he teaches the trainee, okay? So this goes back to the culture again. This sets that message right at the beginning. If I'm going to put somebody in charge of your training that I have not trained to be a teacher and is not a good teacher, you're sending that message it doesn't matter. And that doesn't matter message is going to be related to the risk taker, and it's going to create that risk taker moving forward. Relying on an OSHA 30 hour to train your foremen and supervisors to be trainers. OSHA 30 hours are good. There's good information in there, but most of the time, and I've done an OSHA 30 hour, I'm an outreach trainer, so I understand this. A 30 hour is packed into 4.5 days, okay? When I take a look at 30 hours of training, I'm thinking that usually takes about a month, month and a half, if you want to do it correctly. But jamming 30 hours into 4.5 days is not valuable for anybody, because by day 2 or 3, I would say by day 2, they're starting to plan when they're getting out of there. That's just the way it is. So, but what they found is if you include some foundations of safety leadership. Now, if you take these foremen and supervisors, you want to take them from being bosses and making them leaders. There's a vast difference there, okay? So involving some of the safety leadership modules in the OSHA 30 hour, so what they found is 43% were aware as an OSHA 30 hour module that safety leadership is part of the module. 29% used it, but out of that 29%, 90% of users found it effective. So if you're taking on, if you have trainers in-house, or let's say you call Eric and I and say, can you do a 30 hour tomorrow? First of all, I'm going to tell you you're crazy. But anyway, we actually modified our OSHA 30 hour to include the Safety Leadership Foundation. Because when you send them to us for 30 hour training, or you send them the 30 hour training, you're saying that you believe in them as a leader. So having some of them leadership foundation skills is highly important, especially if you're expecting them to come back and train your employees, okay? Again, I dealt with it firsthand. We took a senior guy and made him a trainer, and it was a train wreck. He didn't want to train. That's not what you paid him for, okay? So there's some people that can teach, and there's some people that can't. So we have to identify your good trainer, and then we have to identify the good trainers and then provide that foundation. And don't just make it a 30 hour, put some safety leadership in there. Because again, we're taking them from bosses to leadership. That's what we're saying with that message, okay? Again, this is all related to that risk taker at work. And Eric's going to get into, after I'm done, Eric's going to get into the real psychology of stuff. But this foundation has to be in place correctly before you even invite behavior-based safety. So we look at the Foundation for Safety Leadership module. It's designed for supervisors and employees. It provides real-world construction-based scenarios. But I want to focus on this last part here about the 5 critical leadership skills. Again, I can't stress that enough. When you choose a supervisor or foreman, or even a hourly employee, and say, I want you to take control of the safety aspects of the site or your crew or anything like that, you are telling them, I want you to be a leader. In that transition, you have to understand that they have to be a leader. That you have to train them as a leader, okay? So that's leading by example. That's engaging and empowering hazard reporting. That's, active listening. I can't tell you enough how important that is. Again, we go back to the beginning where we say everybody wants a voice, okay? And they want to know that they're heard, okay? They don't want to be considered just a number. That's a big problem with them. Developing, mentoring, and coaching. The generations have changed. What worked 10 years ago and for a certain generation does not work today. We have to talk to them different. We have to train them different. Or they're going to take a bigger risk. And, dealing with some of the generations firsthand, there's some real, I don't want to say reckless, but there's the I'm invincible attitude is even stronger nowadays than it was before. So developing that mentoring and coaching process is huge. We used to bring in an employee and we used to train them for a full day and we used to send them in the field. And okay, so we go back to selecting a trainer. So we selected a trainer that didn't really want to train and taught them the bad way. So we trained them and coached them to keep moving that risk-taker attitude forward, okay? And that's where the whole verbiage came, we've always done it that way, okay? So developing, mentoring, and coaching is huge. This generation and the generation before, I've got a chart coming up that'll show the generations. They need more coaching and mentoring, okay? They need to be talked to every week about how things are going. So training and following up and the consistent contact is becoming a critical part of the next generation, all right? So make sure that we have a good mentoring and coaching program in place, and then recognize safe behavior, okay? There's 2 parts of the behavior-based model. So we're recognizing, and then we have to do the negative approach when we're dealing with unsafe behavior, and Eric will kind of get into that. But this doesn't have to be a huge deal. Organizations are getting away from putting out monetary rewards for safety performance, only because it gets costly and stuff like that. But you have to recognize their safe behavior. Okay, so do that in a way that I would recommend, like a group. We have a team grill out, we have a team party, or whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be monetary, and I actually wouldn't even recommend monetary anymore. If you've got 500 employees, that monetary gets expensive real fast. But recognizing the positive is going to go a long way of minimizing that risk taker's behavior. Integrity. Integrity is doing the right thing because it is the right thing to do, okay? You want to know how your safety culture is? You drive on a job, if you're a safety director, if you're a safety professional, go drive on a job site and watch them scatter. If they scatter to go get their PPE, you got a problem, okay? If they all decide to take a break as soon as you pull up, they're avoiding you because they were probably doing unsafe behavior, okay? It's kind of like when HR drives up. And I don't mean to offend anybody, but HR, they drive up, everybody scatters. It's kind of a unique phenomenon, okay? But you want to create the integrity in the environment that they're going to do the right thing regardless if anybody's watching, okay? And in this day and age, everybody's watching all the time. We're being surveilled all the time, whether it's social media or anything like that. But integrity really is, we have this approach in our organization. and we do this approach regardless of anybody's watching. If you have that, you're already starting to change that model of a risk taker in your employees, okay? Again, move beyond compliance and blame. I can't tell you enough. The biggest problem with some organizations is that there's too many egos. And I'm being very honest because I think you guys deserve honesty about this stuff. But if you have a safety committee, let's take this for an example. If you have a safety committee and you walk in that room and everybody thinks they run that safety committee because their ideas are the best and this is the way we're going to do things, and you have that ego in there, you're going to have problems, okay? You have to go in there and strip yourself of that ego and say, I'm not perfect. I'm smart. I've got good ideas, but I'm not perfect. But the next person is going to bring another link in that chain that's going to allow me to succeed, okay? We don't need to blame. We need to look for solutions. The root cause analysis we all do on incidents and accidents and stuff like that, that's designed to find a solution, okay? It's a cause and a solution, not cause and blame. We don't want to pin somebody to the wall that they were wrong, and move well beyond compliance. Like I said in the beginning, if we're still in the realm that we're going to do just the bare minimum as far as compliance, then we're missing the boat. Your culture should be well beyond just compliance. They should be in best management practices and get into that next evolution of safety, okay? And data trending. There is data everywhere you can do on your organizations. We have a report we run for clients that shows a huge amount of data. It can show you how much money you save. It can show you all this stuff. Use that data to forward your goal, okay? And build that integrity within your organization. You can do that. There's tons of data out there, and the numbers never lie. But just remember, garbage in, garbage out. If you're putting garbage numbers in, you're going to get garbage out. And if you're going to take those numbers and you're going to fudge them to make it look good, you're not being honest with yourself as a leader and as an organization, okay? So again, this really starts right now, right here, all right? If you're going to be honest about the data and stuff like that, it's going to give you an honest answer. And I have some companies that, you know, they have 1,500 employees or 3,000 employees, and their incident rate is 0.05. And I got to throw a red flag on that. I just do, because either you're really that good or you're manipulating the numbers to make you look that good. And that's not honesty. That's not integrity, okay? Remember, it takes a team. It absolutely takes a team. This is an effort to build your culture to accept working with the psychology of safety. You cannot address that at-risk behavior or that risk taker unless you have a strong culture. And it absolutely takes a team. Remember the old saying, it takes a village. It absolutely takes a team. Whether it be your safety management team, your safety committee, if you form safety teams with certain employees, and it's your whole workforce too. This is a huge undertaking when you start dealing with behavior-based safety. When you're starting to bridge that gap between risk management and the risk taker. You're trying to convince them to not take that risk. You're trying to convince them that the unsafe behavior is the wrong way to go. And we might be trying to undo 30 years of learning of bad habits. So this absolutely takes a team. Hands down, there is no one person approach here, okay? If we take a look at that team, what are some of them fundamentals? You know, you got to keep employees informed. I don't care how you communicate, as long as you're communicating. Because if an employee can bring something to you as part of the team and doesn't hear from you in 3 weeks, you have a problem. They've already abandoned you. Absolutely have to keep your employees informed of what's going on and what you've done to fix things, when the next meeting is, whatever it may be. Communication is king, okay? Effective training. I can tell you this is an absolute cornerstone to the foundation here, because I got an example. My son started a new job. He started a job last year in an organization. He comes home after 2 weeks of working there, and he says, man, I just ran a forklift. And, of course, me being who I am, I said, oh, how was the training for that? And he said, don't worry about it. I watched the video. And I'm thinking, right there, okay, we don't do videos much anymore. If you're doing videos, you're kind of lost on people because they just zone out. But, again, that sets the message from the front, right? We're going to do the bare minimum, so we expect you to do the bare minimum for risk management. So are we providing the right equipment? Are we saying do this huge task, and we're going to give you faulty equipment? Again, this balance between risk taker and someone who's going to look at risk very differently is a very, very thin line here. We have to balance it very delicately. And if we don't even provide them the right equipment, that's a problem. That sends that message right out front that, you know what, we made you watch the video, here's a broken screwdriver, go put on a roof. I mean, that whole model is going to end up failing, okay? And you've sent that message, and it's very quick, that it's okay to take risk. Don't worry about it. Just get it done. You got to be in it to win it, and you have to seek that input, and you have to bolster the safe behavior, okay? Everybody wants to be awarded, okay? We kind of live in a society that there's ribbons for everybody, okay? But if we're really going to correct the psychology and the unsafe behavior and create an employee that's not going to be a risk taker, you have to do something to reward that safe behavior. It could be a pat on the back. It could be some verbal recognition, whatever it may be. We have to understand, we have to award that and bolster that safe behavior. Team success. What's your mission? Right now, as we sit in that meeting here today, what is your mission when we're done with this presentation? The information you can take from this and bring back to your team. What is your overall mission as far as risk management and this presentation and stuff like that? We obviously want to eliminate or minimize risk takers. That's the goal. But you have to put your mission out there for everybody to see it. We all talk about mission statements and stuff like that. But if you're going to create a mission and you have these goals and you want everybody to participate, that has to be your in it to win it phase. This is it. All my energy is going to this. I believe in it. You should believe in it. We are all drinking the same Kool-Aid. This is what we're going for. We're a mission first, safety always organization, and you have to have the goals along with that, participation and communication. Okay? The communication might be the key and king of all, because there's nothing worse than miscommunication. And we can even look in our own daily lives, because a lot of us communicate between text messages and emails. When you send an email or you send a text message, be clear and concise in your communication, because on the other end of that receiving is perception. And that perception can change with simple explanation points and everything else. People can take stuff wrong really fast. So make sure you're clear and concise with your communication, and that is the mother of all, okay? If you're not communicating your mission, your goals, then you cannot expect participation or cooperation. This is a big chain, a lot of moving pieces to it. And this is why we started with this in the presentation model, because you have to have all this in place before you start dealing with that risk taker, okay? So let's take at face value. You know, when you're starting to bring people in your organization, you have to, you're obviously looking for people right now, right across the board. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. This is a big struggle for everybody. It's the hiring and retention process that is a very big struggle for everybody right now. So you have to identify what you want in an employee, because again, we go back to the beginning. If we build a safety culture, it takes years sometimes to get the right method and the right model that works, and you can sustain it and maintain it. If you have the correct model in place, it's working great, and you bring in the wrong employee, you hire the wrong person, they can take it down pretty fast. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen a crew of guys that were a top performing crew of guys. It was a crew of about 5 or 6 guys, okay? it was a brotherhood. They were tight. They didn't have any safety accidents. They got the job done. No injuries, no incidences, nothing. And they brought in somebody. They hired somebody because they just need people right now. So they brought this other person in, and he was the most negative person they have ever laid their eyes on. That crew downward spiraled pretty fast. Okay? And it's, as human nature, we pick up on some of those bad habits really quickly, and we develop them as our own. So if he's a risk taker, if he's a negative person, we tend to grab onto that and become that. It's an amazing phenomenon how fast it happens. And that's why I call it morale corruption, because that person took down that crew within a week. Within a week, the safety director was already fielding phone calls that they wanted this guy off his crew. Another guy had gotten hurt because he took a risk. I mean, it was going down really fast. So you want an employee that emulate your top performers. Look at the traits of what your top performers bring to your organization. That's what you want in an employee. That's going to drive your organization forward, okay? You don't want somebody who's got a history of risky behavior. And you have to understand what's important to you and know what you offer for your company, okay? I'm going to skip these 2 points here, the respond and acknowledge performance and onboarding. Onboarding an employee is a very expensive process. It can cost anywhere between $5,000 to $30,000 depending on your job, just to onboard someone into your organization. That is a huge investment. Okay, that is a huge investment we have to take seriously. And that's also the very beginning point that you're driving your culture. Okay, that message you send right there and now on that onboarding process sends that message that employee is going to carry with them for the duration of their employment. Okay? If we're sitting down an employee as part of the onboarding process and just sitting in front of the videos for 8 hours, it doesn't work. It does not work. You have to make onboarding a personal journey between you and them. This is a very big deal. The money that's spent on onboarding somebody, and I've seen it, processes that were just, you got to sign a bunch of forms and you watch a bunch of videos. That's sending that message right away that, you know, we don't care about you personally as a risk taker. It doesn't matter. We just want you here and doing the job. So here's an example. If we don't apply these steps, okay, if we don't find somebody that emulates our top performer, if we don't understand what's important to us as an organization, if we don't know what we offer, if we don't respond to things in the interview or during that employment process, we don't acknowledge performance, if we don't onboard effectively, here's what happens. Here's my example to you. I worked for an organization that had a fleet, okay? And we had trouble finding employees just like everybody else. And everybody's having that trouble right now. It's not about finding employees, it's finding good employees. And pardon my French, if this is French at all, I was told we just need asses in the seats. We need drivers. Okay, so they kept hiring a certain batch of drivers. And I remember a driver specifically because every year we'd rehire him in spring. We'd bring him back in April. By the end of April, he's already caused thousands of dollars worth of damage because he hit stuff on job sites. Okay, so we just said it didn't matter if he was an at-risk individual. We're going to take him on because we need somebody to deliver product and stuff like that. Okay, but you're also inheriting all those issues. So spend a lot of time delving deep into who you're bringing in your organization, because when he came back and he started hitting stuff, I had no less than 3 drivers come to me and voice their concerns of why they bring him back they were mad because they want to do their job safely. And I have the gall to bring in someone who's going to, you know, corrupt that. So it's very important who you bring in your organization. And when we look at hiring, and everybody knows this is very difficult right now. We have many generations out there. What is good for the baby boomers is not good for Generation Z or Generation Y, the millennials. This is an interesting, we did a survey a couple of years ago, and it came out that, some of these newer generations, they would rather have more vacation time. They would rather have constant challenges. They would rather have all this other stuff to be happy. So your model for who you bring in, how you approach onboarding has changed dramatically over the years. They want more mentoring, more coaching. They want technology as part of their job. And again, constantly being challenged. Some of these generations, when you look at it, if you don't constantly challenge them, they're going to quit. And they're going to do it relatively quick. Where that longevity of 30 years is not there anymore. If you don't provide a good place for them, a safe workplace, a one that inspires to move forward and growth, they're probably going to last about 2 to 5 years in your organization. They're going to be gone. Okay? And having a revolving door because you don't understand the employees you're bringing in, that's not going to help your safety culture. Nothing's going to stick. Okay? And think about hiring for safety. There is a process that you should consider for your applicants. And this is a survey based on how they perceive risk. Okay? I understand that the hiring pool is very tight right now. Okay? But as part of the application process, when you have this large pool of applicants, okay? Remember, and I want you to remember this forever. You don't just need asses in the seats because you're inheriting an incredible amount of stuff when you have that mentality, okay? You can still be selective, and I encourage you deeply to be selective. I know it's tough, but being selective is going to save you a lot of headaches. And part of being selective is maybe as part of the applicant process is we have a survey in there about how they perceive risk. And we've all taken them, right? It asks the same question 4 times, just in a different way to get a different answer or a truthful answer. But you can use that as part of your application process because that will give you some idea with relatively certainty that they're a risk taker before they even enter your door. So as part of your, we all have, a lot of us have online applications. You can make that part of your process is a risk value assessment. How do they perceive risk? And that will help you identify or possibly identify a risk taker before they even walk in the door. Again, if we're looking at the onboarding process, you're looking at $5,000 to $30,000 this could take to onboard someone successfully. You want the best candidate. So you're going to have to get inventive with your application process. Because remember, what you're bringing in is going to affect your culture. Okay, it could either create more at-risk individuals or risk takers, or it could help you. You have to be more selective there, okay? Experience and qualifications, you're not going to find a whole lot of experience. There's a generation in there, like I said, they're job bouncing a lot, okay? So you have to give them something to stay in order to quantify their prior experience and their experience models. So new hire and training and orientation, spend that time on training and orientation. It's a huge investment bringing someone in, and it's going to be a huge investment for you down the line. And we all know that. If we invite bad habits in our organization, it's going to sink it. So think of it that way. It's not about just hiring because we need help. I want you to put that safety and that risk management approach right at the top of the pyramid and say, we are going to hire based off of if you're an at-risk individual or you're a risk taker or if you're a safe individual, okay? And again, there's surveys and stuff out there that you can utilize and develop that will give you kind of a picture before you start onboarding these individuals or looking at their applications if there's red flags there already. And I would highly recommend that to start implementing that in your hiring process. So here's your onboarding safety strategy, okay? When we start taking a look at it again, this is my closing part here. So you have to have a strong culture, and that involves onboarding for safety, okay? This is your strategy. You're going to have that formal application process. as part of that pre-employment screens, why can't you involve a survey, a risk perception survey that kind of gives you a gauge of how they feel about safety? And there's ways, like I said, there's ways you can do it. You can ask the same question 4 times to get different answers. You're going to be able to gauge how that employee perceives risk, okay? Then you have your post-offer screens, the new hire orientation. Make it a fun, inventive, engaging process for the orientation. If we're just gonna, I was part of a process that we'd sit them down with paperwork, and if anybody's bought a house and they had to sign paperwork, this is the pile of paperwork we gave them, and it was about 1.5 inches to 2 inches high, and they signed paperwork as they watched videos. That is not an effective approach to orientation, okay? I could start that orientation at 9 a.m. with a great speech about how I perceive risk and how they could be safe. By 9:30, if I don't have them engaged, forget it. They've already forgotten that message. So you're setting that stage already for the at-risk individual. Spend some time on training. Develop a program that is strong, that's going to build your culture, okay? That is going to build that non-risk-taking employee, okay? There's going to be times we have to develop a program that's going to deprogram the bad habits. If you have a good training team, if you have a good safety management team, you're going to be able to spot those behaviors right away, okay? After you bring that employee on, check in at the 30, the 60, the 90, 6 months. Keep checking in on that employee. Remember, the model has changed, okay? We don't just train that individual and set them loose. That's not what they want. They want to be engaged. They want to be a part of the process, okay? That'll make them look at risk very differently, and most likely they're not going to be that risk taker on your crews or in your buildings, okay? I look at this process, and including the annual review, I look at this process as creating a safety advocate for your organization, okay? Everybody has a voice out there, and it all really starts on the selection process and the onboarding, and we all know that, okay? We all know if we spend time on this model, if we spend more time on all the small pieces and parts, we're gonna develop something that's very successful for our organization moving forward. I know it's going to be tough, especially with the hiring, but we're going to create a successful organization that's going to open the door to start implementing the behavior-based safety approach. And I don't even like to call it BBS anymore because that's kind of outdated for me, but I want you to think about the psychology of safety. I want you to start thinking about that, because if you have everything in place and you're still having incidents and accidents, it's because you haven't dealt with the psychology of safety, which this can be very tricky if you don't have everything I just talked about in place, okay? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Hopefully he can grab the screen successfully.
All right, thank you, sir. Do this real quick.
Also, what I'd like to add too is that, that we do have the chat open, and some people are asking have some good comments in there. So if you feel free to either chime in or put something in the chat if you'd like. I'm sure Shannon and Eric will probably be monitoring that as well. And Brent and I are also looking at the chat as well.
Excellent. All right. Well, folks, thank you, Shannon. As always, excellent information. We're at that halfway mark, so hopefully you've got your coffee mugs topped off and still comfortable. And we're going to kind of delve, now that we've got our foundation in place, let's talk about our current risk takers and what we can do as leaders. So I think it's important to stress, as many of you know, and I'm sure would agree, that the majority of incidents or injuries are not intentional. That in most cases, yes, an injury may have resulted in a decision that an employee or employees made. Perhaps they felt rushed or decided to kind of take shortcuts to catch up on a project that may be behind schedule. But we really should kind of ask ourselves, what compelled that employee to come to that decision, to be willing to accept that risk? In other words, we should really kind of take a step back look at the big picture before assigning blame to see what truly led to that employee feeling that he or she had no choice but to put themselves and possibly others at risk to get the job done, understanding the consequences should they fail or something go tragically wrong. What are the operational pressures? Who's setting the tone? What's being communicated to employees, either verbally or non-verbally? Now, if you strip human behaviors down to their core, many psychologists believe that we have three primary motivators. One, rewards or pleasure. We'll later refer to these as consequences. Pain avoidance, and then the path of least resistance, energy saving or shortcuts. Now, in the spirit of full disclosure, ladies and gentlemen, I am not a psychologist, so I will be relying on and citing those who are throughout this presentation. But during my research, I found some rather fascinating facts. Now, according to an article by Rachel Grieve and Dr. Emily Lowe Calverley and published by The Conversation, humans are just as motivated by rewards as Pavlov's dogs. Recall he used a bell to condition dogs to salivate by associating the tone with food. Because when we are rewarded, special pathways in our brains activate. So not only does this feel good, but this activation leads us to want and seek more of it. But I think it's important to point out that the frequency and consistency by which we're rewarded heavily influences our perception of that reward, which then ultimately influences how likely we are to engage in that activity again. We call this the schedules of reinforcement. The simplest type of reinforcement is continuous reinforcement, which is a great way to train a new behavior. But intermittent reinforcement tends to be the strongest way to maintain a behavior. And this is when a reward is delivered after some of the behaviors, but not all. Now, according to an article by Sidney Sadeghi and published by Titanium Success, avoiding immediate pain, or again, perception thereof, is more motivating than gaining immediate pleasure. So think about it. If you had to quickly choose between escaping from a crazed lunatic who's bearing down on you with a knife while waiting in line for millions in free cash, like me, chances are you're going to choose to run away first and then hopefully go back and try to collect that cash if any's left. There are also emotional and intellectual aspects to what behaviors we choose. Let's say you're at this killer party and the rounds are flowing, they're coming left and right, but you drove and you don't want to leave your car overnight. So how many of us have looked at that gin and tonic or beverage of choice and drank it even though we knew logically that we shouldn't have? I think most of us have been there. Intellectually, we shouldn't have had that second gin and tonic if we wanted to drive home, but you know, we had a hard week and man, we really wanted it. So what wins? Intellect or emotions? In most cases, an ounce of emotion wins over logic every time. Our emotional pain or pleasure receptors are also hardwired in our brains to be much stronger because our brains tell us to act rather than think ahead to the future. And we'll discuss this more later, but you're going to start to see how our behaviors, whether positive or negative, are reinforced if the consequences of our behaviors are perceived as positive, immediate, and certain. Now, I was reading an article by Rajesh Sethi titled, "Why Many Smart People Take Shortcuts and How You Can Avoid That Trap." And he points out that some shortcuts are a positive thing. For example, you take a certain route every day to and from work, but hey, a friend tells you about a shortcut. You take it, saves you 30 minutes each way, saves you money and fuel. However, I think we all know that most shortcuts we're talking about don't include ones like this. So why do intelligent people take shortcuts knowing that the odds of success are usually not in their favor? I think the simple reason, according to Rajesh's quote, the perceived cost and risk of taking a shortcut is less, and they can always move on if the shortcut does not pay off, unquote. So in other words, the loss of taking a shortcut is minimum. Again, we're speaking about general behavior. After all, in most cases, you don't have to shout to the world that you're taking a shortcut. If it doesn't work, who needs to know, right? But if it does work, you win. Not a bad return for what can be a small investment. Now, let's discuss these motivators more in terms of kind of enhancing our safety culture and safe behaviors overall. As far as rewards, many clients that we work with have some sort of recognition program in place that involves utilizing tangible rewards to reinforce those positive behaviors. Shannon mentioned some earlier. Tangible meaning anything that you can kind of hold, touch, or see. For example, gift cards, points, coins, T-shirts. Now, personally, nothing wrong necessarily about doing this. I think overall employees appreciate it, and you may be getting results, recognizing, again, like Shannon said, no one size fits all. But here's something to ponder. Once you start handing out tangible rewards to employees, it can be very, very difficult, I would say maybe, if not impossible, to stop. In other words, these become transactional. I will work safe if you give me something. So if you at any point have to start taking these tangible rewards away, should there ever be a need to do so, let's say economic downturn, pandemic, because they do tend to be expensive over time, as Shannon mentioned, you may see employees' morale plummet and injuries dramatically increase. So a solution that we're kind of beginning to see more and more clients transition to is those team celebrations that Shannon mentioned, whether planned or spontaneous. These events tend to celebrate the entire team's performance, think leading indicators, and helps to bring awareness to those safe behaviors, the positive consequences of working safely, as well as an opportunity to talk to your employees about why they're celebrating. So, hey, food for thought. So we've kind of established already that avoiding pain motivates our behavior, but how does this apply specifically to changing behaviors to support a positive safety culture? Well, many times if you ask an employee why they work safely, you're going to get responses such as, well, because I don't want to get hurt, or as we've just discussed, or I don't want to get in trouble. So notice these motivators are based on avoidance. But think about it. Do we really remember something that we don't want to happen versus something that happens? So for example, if I go home this evening after work and my wife asks, so how was your day? Chances are I'm not going to respond, man, it was awesome. I didn't get hurt today, or I didn't get in trouble today. Now, for some of us, that may be worth celebrating, but all jokes aside, we kind of expect it, right? So at the end of the day, it doesn't really drive safe behaviors. When you avoid getting hurt, you don't really think about it. In fact, it was Peter Drucker, one of the best known and influential thinkers and authors about management theory, who wrote about how avoidance does not address an unsafe process. Now, compare that to going home and feeling good because you achieved something safe versus simply avoiding getting hurt. Let's say the CEO of your company was on the job site and observed you do something safely and went out of his or her way to personally thank you. Or maybe a suggestion you made to improve a process safely and efficiently was listened to and eventually accepted and ended up saving your company $3 million, and you were recognized for that. Or your foreman simply went out of his way to just say thank you. Thanks, man, for wearing your hard hat. You're making my life easy and setting a really good example. Chances are it's going to be these experiences that you're going to remember and strive for. Now, you may find some employees still have that belief that what is easiest should be safest, or speed equals productivity, that, hey, I'm a team player, right? Again, I would argue that these beliefs are more symptomatic of a broken safety process that have been allowed to calcify and metastasize. So what we like to remind clients is that production and safety do not have to compete. But we recognize that production, safety, quality, these are all important if your company is going to grow, and we want that. However, we can produce safely. So if you are deficient in any one of these areas, chances are everyone's going to ultimately suffer. It's not safety that slows productivity. I would argue it's going to be a job site fatality or serious injury that brings everything to a screeching halt. And then we have, as we well know, that darn experience modification rating, kind of known as that EMOD factor. For those who may not be familiar, this is a rating number that's calculated by insurance carriers based upon your workers' compensation premiums and claims payments, and is designed to show what risk level your company is based on similar companies in your industry and location. So in your world, in the construction industry, as you know better than anyone, to even compete on a bid, there's often a requirement that your EMOD be within a certain range, lower being better, and it takes years, I think 3, of solid performance to really lower an EMOD. So with that said, let's just watch a quick video and then we'll kind of discuss some things that you may have observed. Pretty amazing, huh? So what do we see? Well, I don't know if you noticed that the man and the woman crossing the tracks, I actually timed it, and the woman cleared the tracks in less than a second before that train sped by. And afterwards, I don't know if you noticed, but she and the man she was with and then this other man kind of appear to comfort her. So they realize how close she came to a catastrophic outcome. And what I've always found fascinating, and if you look at the picture now, you're going to see, I don't know if you see that pedestrian bridge that leads over those tracks. So I'm sure, we're all asking ourselves, why did she and her companion risk crossing these tracks when a pedestrian bridge was available? A shortcut? Habit? It's what they were taught or maybe observed others do? Was there ever a consequence? Did anyone ever say anything to them? Again, our motivation derives from the outcomes that we intend to achieve from our actions. So, who is the risk taker? Well, the risk taker's us, but guys tend to take more risks than women, especially with recreational and financial risks. Just observe the behavior of any single adolescent male when females are watching. You can see how his risk tolerance increases. And in a competitive situation with his buddies, his risk tolerance increases even more. Of course, women take risks too. Research shows that women are generally more inclined to take social risks. For example, they're more likely to change careers late in life or express unpopular opinions in meetings. But they also take recreational risks. After all, women, like men, strive to impress in certain situations. Now, Andreas Wilke, who's an evolutionary psychologist at Clarkson University and an expert on risk-taking and decision-making, believes that risk-taking can lead to extraordinary success or extraordinary failure, and is thus an important aspect of our human condition. So rather than being generally risk-seeking or risk-avoiding, people are kind of a complicated blend of both. Quote, a person might be risk-seeking in a recreational risk way, but that same person may be risk-adverse in, let's say, financial situations, unquote. A Columbia University psychologist, Elke Weber, was the first to account for this subjectivity with a model called domain-specific risk propensity. It holds that everyone has a unique propensity to risk in one of 5 categories: financial, health and safety, recreational, ethical, and social. And at a given time in a person's life, usually depending on relationship status, his or her propensity in each category is inherent and unshakable. Quote, people have inherent risk thresholds. When airbags were put in cars, for example, deaths did decrease, but not as much as they were predicted to. That's because people started to drive a little faster, thus keeping their overall safety risk level the same, unquote. Now, Weber and others have found that a person's risk propensity in one category says very little about his or her propensity in another, but people still follow a predictable pattern. It actually turns out that within a certain domain, a person's tendency to take risks correlates with how much he or she expects to benefit from that outcome. So there is a March 28th, 2017 EHS Today article by Esteban Tristan titled, "Is Your Brain Hardwired for Safety?" Think about it. In our world, what do we have? Tight deadlines, task saturation, reduction in staffing, and competing demands. These are just a fact of life. So therefore, it's not surprising that we sometimes look for ways to take shortcuts, as we previously discussed. Again, some shortcuts are relatively harmless. Others can be catastrophic. And we often know that the shortcuts we take may have serious consequences, yet we still take them. Our tendency to take risk may also be driven by our personality traits and attitudes. This article groups traits into 4 safety factors: rules, awareness, caution, and control. Because not everyone interprets rules the same way. People who are rule-bound like rules. They prefer rules. They need rules. It gives them structure. It gives them security. It gives them predictability. While there are those who feel that rules restrict maybe and view them more as kind of guidelines. Employees who frequently notice things faster, good situational awareness, those who remain focused and accurately remember things tend to be injured less, as they can quickly and consistently detect changes in their environment. On the other hand, employees who frequently struggle to be aware, maybe lack focus, get distracted, are more likely to miss a change in conditions, which can raise their risk exposure. You know, some employees are very comfortable taking risks, while others are very risk avoidant. Employees who are naturally uncomfortable with risks and less impulsive tend to engage in safer behavior and are injured less frequently. Employees who take risks think that, hey, nothing bad's going to happen to them. They might say something like, yeah, I get why this rule's here, but it doesn't really apply to me because I'm more experienced than someone who would go out and hurt themselves. Employees who feel that they are in control of what happens to them, as well as their emotions under stress, generally feel that outcomes are a direct result of their actions. Versus people who do not feel they are in control, they tend to be a little bit more fatalistic and attribute events to either luck or circumstance. They might say something like, yeah, this rule's here, but it doesn't really make sense to me in the real world because, hey, let's face it, if it's my time, it's my time. So what do? Well, keep in mind that while our personalities and abilities influence what we do, they don't have to dictate our actions. We always have the choice to work safely. A person who naturally sees rules as guidelines can still make an active choice to follow safety policies, just like an individual who tends to be forgetful or distracted can create habits to be more observant on the job. We simply need to understand that some of these behaviors may require more effort on our part, supervisors, leaders, peers, because they do not come as easily to us as other behaviors. But by understanding how our minds are hardwired for safety, we can recognize our starting point and better prepare ourselves to work safely in situations where we could be seriously injured. Again, as Shannon mentioned, perhaps questions for a pre-employment survey can be written that help to identify these traits. We would just say, just make sure that you involve HR and maybe even company legal before developing any survey, just to be safe. Here's a quick video for you, and then we'll kind of discuss. Again, why? Why do people do it? Could it be they just don't think of the consequences and feel it'll never happen to them? Well, again, we'll discuss a little bit later some other factors that are at play and how through our actions we can influence change. Now, according to a Business Insider article by Drake Bayer, dated August 27th of 14, happier and more optimistic people take more risks. Think about it. If you're feeling on top of the world, you see life's odds in your favor, you may be more apt. University College London professor Marina Hertz also writes, quote, when we're happy, we take more risks, are more trusting, more generous, unquote. Research also suggests that when the days get shorter and colder, people are less likely to take risk. Behavioral finance scholar Lisa Kramer said in an interview that, quote, as the exposure to daylight diminishes, we respond in a biological way to the change in exposure to daylight, when we're not that different than our ancestors who would retreat in the winter, unquote. Now, what about teens? While teens are thought to be carefree risk takers, research actually shows just the opposite. In a 2012 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, teens tend to overestimate known risks, but are more likely than adults to make risky decisions if the outcome is unknown. So in other words, teens are cool with not knowing what's going to happen, and so therein lies the risk. According to a Stanford study, night owls versus morning birds tend to be more impulsive and take more risks. I don't know, maybe sleep deprivation plays a role? Here's something interesting. Kellogg management professor Camilla Kunin has found a gene that actually regulates hormone levels in the reward center of your brain that can predict whether you're likely to become a pathological gambler or a risk-loving stock market trader. And finally, in his book, The Click Moment, Franz Johansson writes that we all have an appetite for risk. In extreme cases, we'll even risk our lives to keep it satisfied. A perfect example might be if you're driving down a rainy, winding street, you're going to slow down to stay safe. But if that road opens up into a clear, dry highway, you're probably going to speed up. Yet the chance of getting into an accident is about the same either way. So let's talk a little bit about habits. What's that old saying? The soul leaves the body, but the habit stays, or something to that effect? Well, you know what? There may be some truth to that. Habits are extremely hard to change. Just ask any 20-year smoker who's trying to quit, right? So when it comes to developing safe behaviors, what's our goal? I would argue to make safe thinking and actions instinctual in all things at all times. We just think it and do it automatically. And if we can get our employees to take these safe work habits and use them at home, bonus. Because after all, we're about 150 times more likely to get injured at home than at work. And for those of you who mow the grass, weld, grind, do woodwork or auto repairs at home, ask yourself, hey, are you checking guards? Are you wearing PPE? Think about it. So changing bad habits is good to recognize as a barrier, no doubt. You've heard the saying that our brains are, again, hardwired. Well, again, there's truth to that too. That's why once you learn to ride a bike, you can go, 20, 30 years without riding one, but then you can jump on one and it's like you've never stopped. What happens is that when we're learning to balance, our brains are being inundated with all these new sensory inputs. So all of our neurons, those nerve cells, are just firing off independently. But over time, our neurons and synapses, which kind of act like bridges that connect the neurons, change. Everything starts to fire in sequence and then physically connect. Your brain becomes hardwired. Now, this is obviously a very simple explanation. The human brain is much more complex, but it may explain why employees who have engaged in at-risk behaviors for so long without any negative consequences develop habits that are very difficult to break. It may explain why we hear things like, hey, who are you to tell me how to do my job when I've been doing it this way for 20 years and never got hurt? So let's face it. Generally, most adults don't like being told what to do unless they understand the meaning behind the change and how they stand to benefit from it. Shannon mentioned earlier the importance of integrity and the impact of the words that we use. As safety professionals, as foremen, as leaders, we need to demonstrate integrity in our words and our actions because we really need to be building relationships of trust with our employees. And for some, it may take longer than others, but only then will they, hopefully, be open to the possibility of change. Change is scary. Those old leadership sayings of, I don't care if my employees don't like me as long as they respect me, or fear is more powerful than love. Yeah, those have gone out the window. It's very difficult to earn one's respect, but man, is it easy to lose it. Can you respect someone but not like them? Well, from the research I've read, it's almost impossible to respect someone if you don't like them. Just think of a supervisor that you worked for who you really liked. Did they inspire you to work harder and safer? Did you trust them? Were you more open to their direction? So the purpose of all of this is to say, as leaders and employees, we all have bad habits, but these can be changed now that we understand a little bit more about what we're up against. But as leaders who practice integrity, who lead by example, who know their employees, who know their likes and dislikes, heck, they may even know their wives or husbands and kids or pets' names, who have built relationships and earned respect, who can have honest conversations with their employees that lowers everyone's defenses, we need to understand that it's going to take some effort to mentor change. So for some, it may take more frequent and consistent intervention than others. But keep in mind, most of our employees want to do the right thing, the right way, and certainly don't want to get hurt. They just need guidance, clarity, support, leadership. For that small percentage that willfully or intentionally disobey or refuse to adapt, yeah, this is where we may have to get HR involved. But overall, our goal is to make safe behavior a lifelong habit, and it's possible. So up to this point, we've kind of learned about what motivates us, some characteristics of risk takers, what science and neuroscience has learned about our brain's propensity to take risks and how habits are formed. Now I'd like to kind of share another concept that explains what motivates us to behave the way we do, and then begin to kind of delve a little bit deeper into how we can address it. Now, some of you may already be familiar with this concept, as it's an integral component of applied behavior science. We call it the ABCs of human behavior. But it basically recognizes that everything we do has an outcome. And there are two forces which influence behavior. We call them activators that come before the behavior, and then the consequences that come after. So which one do you think has more impact? Well, let's find out. As mentioned, activators influence behavior before the behavior takes place. There can be natural and controlled activators. Some examples of natural activators include hunger or fatigue. Hunger influences my behavior to eat, just as fatigue influences my behavior to sleep. Some examples of controlled activators include policies, training, signs. Before I set forth on that job site, I attend a safety training briefing and become familiar with the work processes and expectations. A safety culture can also be an activator and a consequence. For example, a strong safety culture influences new hires to assimilate, either positively or negatively, as most people don't want to stick out. The key to activators is they work best if they are paired with a consequence. Activators by themselves have been shown to be only 20% effective in changing behavior. Take, for example, signs. The average life expectancy of a safety sign is, I would say, usually about 2 weeks. After that, they kind of mysteriously become invisible. So again, we shouldn't rely solely on safety signs. And if you do use them, keep them fresh and rotate frequently. Of course, regulatory signage is a little bit more restrictive as to how creative you can get. But think of strategic places to post them to. Now, not to be too crude, but the most captive audience tend to be those in restrooms, right? We see it in restaurants. Above urinals or on backs of stall doors are a great place to put safety-related messages. One client I visited actually placed those urine color charts right above the urinals I suppose it can be placed in porta potties too, but the intent obviously was to help employees determine if they were dehydrated. So I don't know, I thought that was pretty clever. Safety signs, these we found kind of online, just open source. You know, you can definitely have fun with them and kind of get creative. But so the problem with activators is that they do tend to give you short-term gains, and most systems tend to rely, I would argue, on them a little bit too heavily. For example, training. We often see this when reviewing corrective actions following a near miss or incident investigation. Quote, need more training. But they never say what type of training is needed, when it will be conducted, and by whom, and what the expected results are. Or an employee is blamed for not performing to a standard. And when asked, the supervisor might quip, hey, well, he was trained. Yeah, but that was 6 years ago. So training is a key component, but it may need to be frequent depending on observed employee performance. It should be dynamic, consistent, you know, make sure it does reflect current processes, and depending on needs and regulatory compliance. But again, training is just one component because topic retention is limited. So training really should be paired with consequences. So as far as the behaviors themselves, we can pretty much just group them into two types. We have desirable or undesirable. An undesirable behavior may be, let's say, failure to lock and tag out equipment prior to removing a guard. Now do you really think at this point failing to lock and tag out is a training, or is it a performance issue? What about not wearing a seatbelt? Now, by now, we've received numerous activators on why we should wear seatbelts, right? It's stressed during driver's ed. Your vehicle probably has an audible or visual indicator of some sort. If you don't buckle up, activator. There have been numerous public service announcements, right? So it's not like we lack knowledge. I would argue it's a performance issue. And as we mentioned previously, undesirable behaviors are symptoms of a poorly designed system. Think about it. The near miss or accident is what you see. That's the end result. What we don't see are the many unsafe behaviors or conditions that led up to it. Some may even have been sanctioned by management, think culture. So when an employee does something unsafe, there's a reason. And the key is to try to figure out what that is. Now, as we've mentioned, consequences can be either positive or negative. Positive consequences may be appreciative feedback, recognition, that feeling of a sense of accomplishment. Negative accomplishments may include corrective feedback or discipline, or worse, a serious injury or illness. Think about the last time you were told by your supervisor or foreman that you did a good job. How long ago was that? And how did you respond when you were told that you did a good job? When was the last time that you thanked someone else for doing a good job? What's more emotionally impactful, getting positive feedback or not getting hurt? It has been proven that consequences are about 80% effective in changing behavior. And how is that accomplished? The most effective means is from feedback. So kind of putting it all together, let's watch another video, and this one has made its circuit around the safety community, so some of you may have already seen it. Wow, what do we see? Well, to me, it looks like a tourist attraction, right? Performer obviously places his head in the mouth of an alligator. He's probably done this, 1,000 times? What do you think the risks are? What could possibly motivate this guy to do this as a career? Well, he he no doubt receives immediate and positive feedback, right? The audience applauses, they gasp. He's seen as a hero. He hopefully gets paid a lot, but and maybe even after numerous performances, he may even feel a little bit invincible, a little cocky, that it's his skills as a performer. Yeah, that's what keeps him alive. And then what happens this day? For those of you who may know, from what I've heard, a very small drop of sweat drips from his brow and hits the alligator's mouth. Now, I'm not an expert in alligators, but what I have learned is that any stimulus to certain parts of an alligator's mouth triggers a reflex closure of the jaws. Just a result maybe of millions of years of evolution to catch food, I guess. I also know that an alligator's bite force is about 3,700 pounds per square inch compared to ours, which is about 150 to 200 PSI. Now, I don't know the extent of this guy's injuries other than they were very serious. Since then, I've been told he did eventually return to work, believe it or not, and that he no longer sticks his head in the mouths of alligators. That's a good thing. He just uses his arms. So, a great example of how powerful positive, immediate, and certain consequences are in terms of influencing behavior. Here's another way to kind of look at it. A buddy might come up to you and say, hey, I'd like to take my date out to a movie. Do you have any recommendations of what we should see? And I might say, oh yeah, you've got to see The Grudge. All right, so there's our activator. The guy goes out, sees it, pays a lot of money for tickets and popcorn, and he and his date hated it. That's the behavior. So the chances of him asking me again for advice is probably nil. Consequence. One more quick final video, but I think this is, and then we'll kind of talk about how consequences alter behaviors. A great demonstration, right, of the power of habits. I would argue that the negative consequences of answering a hot iron is by far more effective, aka pain, and preventing him from doing that again versus me just telling him ahead of time not to place a hot iron to his ear. So, as we've seen, the key to any consequence is to have it be immediate and certain. We don't want to wait until later in the day or week to give it. Positive feedback and reinforcement, again, is the most powerful consequence, which is why recognizing and reinforcing employees engaged in positive behavior is so stressed. Negative consequences, such as punishment, it doesn't really inspire employees. For some, it actually kind of creates resentment, especially the mass punishment. So to hold supervisors and employees accountable is important at times, but it shouldn't be the end all. And unfortunately, it tends to be used more than it should. Punishment eventually results in avoidance behavior. Like Shannon said, employees will avoid you. So as a safety professional, how effective can you be to facilitate change if those who know the most about the hazards on the job site and who usually have the best solutions won't even share them with you? How do we give effective feedback? Well, combined with actual practice, this may be something to consider for supervisor and or safety committee training, as it can kind of be awkward for most of us at first. Again, it's not intrinsic to our culture to give appreciative feedback, as we kind of get caught in the should-have trap. Why should I thank him for doing his job? She should have known better. He should have lifted properly. Or man, I should have written him up sooner. So giving appreciative feedback is going to take practice. Giving corrective feedback can be just as awkward. Oftentimes, supervisors and leads are promoted based on technical skills versus interpersonal or communication skills, think soft skills, right? In addition, supervisors and leads may have worked their way up to these positions and now find themselves directing and holding accountable those who they may still view as peers. Often it's much easier for us to just look the other way and pretend that we don't see an unsafe behavior. Remember that shortcut. Peers, in most cases, are even less inclined to call out another peer. You may have heard things like, well, I don't get paid to babysit him, or she's an adult, she knows what she's doing, especially if a junior employee observes a senior employee work unsafely. Anyway, giving corrective feedback should be immediate and specific and not accusatory. If you observe an employee not wearing her hard hat, try asking her why. Have her explain to you why she isn't compliant versus you just assuming or telling her. After talking to the employee, you may find that, shoot, she's exhibiting early signs of heat exhaustion. When giving feedback, whether positive or negative, a good technique is using norms-based feedback. Norms is an acronym for it's not an interpretation, it's observable, it's realistic, it's measured, and it's specific. So it might sound something like, hey, Bill, I just saw you lift those boxes, from your car to the job site trailer, and each time you lifted with your legs, you showed great posture and actually asked help for that larger one. I just want to say thanks. You're not only doing yourself a favor, but you're really helping us all out, or maybe something to that effect. When giving corrective feedback, try to also get commitment from the employee to work safely in the future. Something like, hey man, I see you're struggling with that. Let me give you a hand. I saw you lifting this with your back, which is, man, that's going to catch up to you someday. Trust me, I've been there. And you're too good an employee. We need you. Can I show you a better way? Yeah? Was that easier? Cool. Do I have your commitment to use this method from now on? But remember, it may take several discussions before you see behavior change. Remember the power of habits? So don't give up. Stay consistent, frequent. That feedback will yield results. And when giving feedback, it's also important to understand, too, how we're perceived. Body language tends to communicate the most. So before giving corrective feedback, take a deep breath. Remember to be respectful. You may not want to, cross your arms in front of you or hands on hips or, finger out pointing. Definitely don't want to give feedback in front of others, but try to adopt more of kind of a neutral position. Use a sincere approach. Remind yourself that you really do care about the health and well-being of your crew, and you want to help them be successful, because when they're successful, you're successful, and then everyone benefits. Now, each of you have your own style, so use it. Don't try to be someone you're not, because they're going to see right through that. Remember, we talked about integrity, and you know your crew better than anyone, and so you'll know how best to approach the various personalities and generations on your crew. What hot buttons to avoid? Just remember, respect. There's a quote from a poet, Maya Angelou, and she says, quote, "At the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did, but they will remember how you made them feel," unquote. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So as our safety programs mature, emphasis shifts, again, from the foundational elements of safety, such as physical conditions, regulatory training, policies, procedure development and implementation, inspections, and accountability, to more robust topics, such as safety leadership, continual improvement, cultural improvement, engagement, and ownership. A safety culture improvement process should really be a holistic approach to building a sustainable process of long-term reductions in accident frequency and workers' comp costs while improving the work environment. The SCI process also elevates ownership of your leaders and managers in the safety process while engaging employees, kind of a win-win. In addition, an SCI process should apply the techniques of risk assessment, organizational safety improvement, injury prevention, behavior-based safety, some of the elements that we've been discussing, and safety management system development to control those contributing factors of workplace injuries. So you want to develop long-term goals for positive culture change. Remember to identify risk reduction opportunities and then kind of implement an inclusive safety program with a formal management system. Aon's SCI process kind of uses a continual improvement model built around a six-module approach to drive safety management enhancement. The safety culture assessment evaluates key culture elements that identify program strengths and opportunities for improvement. The safety culture enhancement identifies leading and lagging metrics and any associated operational improvements. Behavior-based safety, this is a process that establishes a system of observations of people at work, provides some feedback about how safely they're doing the job. Feedback is then used to reinforce safe behaviors and discourage unsafe behaviors, but it's really key to note it is not a discipline. At the end of the day, you're probably already reinforcing behaviors whether you know it or not. BBS is just kind of a great way to manage it more effectively. And I know for some, BBS kind of has a negative connotation because to really implement a truly effective BBS program, it does take significant time, resources, and investment. And what we found a lot of people tend to do is they kind of want to just pull kind of a generic program offline and then expect immediate results. And then when they don't see them, they get very kind of disenchanted and now develop a negative perception of it. But certainly you can adopt elements of a behavior-based safety. We've seen that work as well. Primarily observations and feedback tend to be the most effective while focusing on unsafe behaviors. And then the safety management system configuration, this is more of a kind of a safety practices gap analysis. There's also the ISO 45001 alignment. This is used to evaluate the current safety management efforts and then align those activities with ISO 45001. And for those who may not be familiar, it's an international organization for standardization standard for management systems of occupational health and safety that was published in March of 2018. And then finally, leadership and transformational safety. This is just basically kind of an evaluation of organizational behavior, ethics, and integrity. So as promised earlier, I wanted to conclude with just a kind of a great exercise that you can use for any at-risk behaviors. You know, safety committees can use this, teams can use this, but it helps to identify what consequences are positive, immediate, and certain, realizing that it is these characteristics that have the most influence on why we take risks. So for this exercise, I thought we just use an at-risk behavior of speeding, because I think that's something we can all relate to. So how it works is we can kind of go around the room, and I'm just going to simulate this, and we're going to ask everybody to kind of list, all right, what are the consequences of speeding? So you might hear, well, you could get a ticket, right? You could be in an accident. You're definitely going to get to your destination faster. There's no doubt about that. Hey, depending on what car you have, it's fun, or motorcycle, but it can be costly. All right. So we've listed all the consequences of this at-risk behavior, and now you'll see the columns on the right. We're going to determine if it's either positive or negative, immediate or future, or certain or uncertain. So getting a ticket, what's that consequence? It's negative. I'm going to pretty much say it's negative. It could be either immediate or future. I mean, you might get a ticket on the spot or have to go to court. And again, uncertain. You might just get a warning. Accidents are definitely negative. Again, you could be in one immediately or 20 years from now. Again, uncertain. But notice when I drive fast, that's a positive thing. You know, I like to drive fast. I definitely get an immediate satisfaction, and it's certain it's going to be there. Same for fun. Yeah, it's definitely fun. It's immediate and it's certain. Cost, well, you know, fuels, tickets, wear and tear on the car, so definitely negative, definitely future. and but certain. So now that we've completed the chart, we want to pick out, okay, what are those consequences that are positive, immediate, and certain? So these are very, very strong motivators. So as a company, if we're to change these at-risk behaviors, all right, we're going to have to change the consequences somehow to either add something negative or introduce something positive for employees to follow the speed limit. So that's kind of how that concept works. So I just wanted to kind of conclude. I loved this quote because as we talked about earlier, you know, change is scary for some. And as supervisors and as leads, you know, we may have to really, especially if we're going to recognize that, you know what, we as a company have taken a long, hard look in the mirror and we've admitted to ourselves that, hey, yeah, we have a problem. And for some, that's the first and hardest step to do. Because take, for example, safety perception surveys. You know, it's very interesting when we administer these safety perception surveys, we'll give one survey to management leaders and then the same survey to employees, frontline employees, and then you get the results. And sometimes there's a huge gap. So sometimes the leadership says, oh yeah, we're safe. I mean, we're industry leading, but when you ask the frontline employees, not so much. So really the first step is just taking a look at that mirror and saying, yeah, we've got some problems. We cannot continue doing business the same way that we've been doing it and expect to get our EMOD down. So once you're past that phase, implementing what Shannon has reviewed, and then for employees, if we're going to make some changes, just recognize it's going to be scary for some. So we might have to really reach out, talk to them, engage them, observe them, kind of help them along this process, remind them that this is a good thing. Change is a good thing, all right? And then eventually you'll see that buy-in. So at that point, ladies and gentlemen, we have about, I think, 7 minutes to spare. So Jim, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks a lot, Eric. I appreciate it. Excellent information. Does anybody have any questions at all for our two speakers? If you would like a copy of the PowerPoint program, please email Shannon or Eric directly, and they can provide you with that, with this program. Also, we want to thank everybody for attending today. Are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions? In the chat, we've had some really good conversation in the chat, so we appreciate all that, that information as well. If there are no questions, I want to thank our two speakers, Shannon and Eric. I think it was great information. I know I took away a couple of things from the presentation. I hope everybody else did as well. Brent and I are also thankful for all of our sponsors that have that helped us put together this program. Also, since this is our last program for the season, well, we will be getting together in the fall to try to put this back together again, and hopefully we'll be bringing this program back so that we can continue to have this great opportunity for a good training for everybody else throughout the state. So again, thanks Eric and Shannon. We really appreciate it. If there are no questions, that's all I have. And we hope everybody has a great day.